Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Cook, and I am here getting ready to meet with Alan White. So we're just going to give them a moment to join us.
Look at
There
we
that.
go.
You did it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. It's great to
Awesome.
see you.
It's nice to see you too. How are you doing? You look great.
Thank you. Well, here I am. I'm showing off my new look.
I like I like it. It's a really great look. You look fantastic. And the color of your top is great.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I had short hair in my early 20s. I chopped off my hair, and so I had a feeling that it would be okay, but didn't know it would fit my more mature self now.
That makes sense.
But I feel good about it. It's good post baby and during the summer months.
I can understand that.
Where are you calling in from now? Are you still in Kentucky?
Yeah. I am. I'm in my office on campus. Leah and I were in Las Vegas the week before last for a much needed vacation, and it was fantastic.
Where did you stay? I kind of love hate Vegas, but I lean toward love. I do, because if you adjust like what your purpose is as you go there, maybe as I can't drink like I used to, so it's now more about the spas and the restaurants for me.
It's the same for me. Like I'm not, I'm not as heavy a drinker as I used to be. But we stayed in the Cosmopolitan, which is right on the Strip. We had a view of the Bellagio and all the sort of historic, famous Vegas hotels. And yes, we took advantage of the spas. We spent a little bit of time, playing some slots, but then we went to see Cirque du Soleil. We went to see burlesque shows. We took a tour of the Grand Canyon. So we had a wonderful time, and we'll definitely go back.
I do. I think it's quite fun, and I bet Leah really geeked out on the restaurants because the food can be pretty fancy.
Yeah, the food was fantastic.
That's
all the meals were really great.
Awesome. Well, it's good to come back nice and rested and rejuvenated somewhat.
Absolutely.
I'm just so glad you could chat with me. So I'll just give a quick, brief overview of how we know each other. And then I'd also love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself and share what you'd like with our audience here. So, yes, so Alan was one of my grad students from the last cohort, and Alan was just an absolutely vital member of that group. We got to work, we were in acting class together. And we were in a play together. We did Gloria at Swine Palace together, which was wonderful. And then we also weathered the pandemic, the very first years and months. I know.
It feels like another life, and it doesn't.
I know, because it feels like it continues. But man, were those initial months rough, So I feel particularly bonded with your class because we had to figure that out. We had to figure out teaching on Zoom, and we had to figure out just acting, So, and then we did a showcase for your class, and that was great. And Alan's continued to be a wonderful resource to me when it comes to all things with pedagogy, with all our DEI initiatives. Alan played a vital role here on campus for LSU, and it was so wonderful to see them get the faculty position at Western Kentucky University just this last year, right?
Yeah. It will be a year in August.
That's crazy. I mean, and so please go ahead and introduce yourself, share what you'd like, and I'd love to hear more about the university position.
Gosh, I feel like you said it all, but hi everybody. My name is Alan. My pronouns are they, them. I'm one of those many hyphenated theater artists. I spent many years sort of acting, directing, stage managing, doing whatever I could to make a living. And it was this is the story I tell my students in my acting class so that they know what they're getting into. It was when the film 12 Years a Slave came out in, I think 2012 actually was when it opened, that I had my revelation moment as an artist in watching Chiwetel Ejiofor perform Solomon Norfolk and do so much with so little that I felt like I had been that everything I had done as a performer in my, at that point, almost 20 years of performing professionally, it was mediocre. And that I had just been, without intentionally knowing it, kind of phoning it in. And I had never pushed myself as an artist to my limits to see, to achieve what, my great potential could be. So that led to a series of studying again through studios, studying with this master, studying with that master, and ultimately getting to the point where I went back to grad school, which is where I got to meet Sonya, because I wanted to see what was possible. And, as people, as I would tell people, I kind of wanted the Harry Potter, Doctor Strange. I wanted to go away outside of my environment where I could focus on the craft, be immersed in the craft, and then come out the other side of that intense training. And that was what led me to LSU and ultimately led me to be here at WKU, because as part of that studying the craft, I also discovered this love for that university level of higher focus on the craft, on the art, the discussion of the art that supports the creation of knowledge in addition to the creation of the production.
I love that. I'm glad that you discovered that there, while with us. I mean, I that's totally what I love most too, is being in an environment where I can stay focused on the craft. And I do still engage with the industry. I audition all the time, but I can come back to the classroom with my students where we can just love on these stories and the tools that we're going to use to bring them to life. And when you know that you care about that and you love that, then teaching at a university or in the studio is absolutely going to be up your alley. So I guess I have a question that kind of pops to mind now that you've been a year out of grad school. And just so people who know, I'm the primary acting teacher for the first year. Then I come back and I teach acting for the camera. Whereas Alan, along with everyone else, is doing many different courses, it's a very comprehensive training. But as you look back on it, how do you feel you grew as an actor through the pillars? How would you, especially since you mentioned the film 12 Years a Slave, how do you feel at being able to live up to that desire that you had when you saw that film?
The first off, the key moment in that film that woke me up wasn't the scene that everyone thinks about. Like, everyone thinks about the big dramatic scene where Solomon Norfolk is whipping the Lupita Nyong'o's character because it's this dramatic scene. But it was actually the juxtaposition of the first scene where we meet that character, Solomon Norfolk, which is this beautiful sunny day in New York, and he's this celebrated musician, and he's walking in the park, and there are people all around him, and his head is held high, and he has the world in his hands. And then the scene at the very end, just before he's rescued, and he's been a slave for 12 years. He's on the plantation. It's another beautiful sunny day. There are people all around him, but they're laboring, and his walk is different. He's bent over, and he's has this sense of always being in flight or fight or flee. Like he's watching for the danger, and it's the same character, but he's changed from these years of hardship that he's lived in. Yeah. And that was I started crying in the movie theater when I saw that, because that was a moment where I was suddenly out of the story. I was watching the story, but I was also watching as an actor. And I realized I don't know how to do that. I couldn't take that character on that journey with just his walk. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't, interacting with anyone. We were just seeing that transformation. And it was in those few steps that I was like, that moment I felt like was better if you took all the acting I had done since I was a 12-year-old child and put it all in it didn't hold up to that moment.
Wow.
And a lot of that was because my acting training, a lot of my acting training up to, prior to LSU and even before seeing that movie was incomplete. It was, partial Stanislavski training, but not like an in-depth, deeply going into Stanislavski training. Because, for example, my undergrad, there was the assumption, because I did a BA in theater, I didn't do a BFA program.
Yeah.
So there was the assumption that we would go on and seek further training after that, if that was what we wanted. I don't think I was aware that that was the next step for me as an actor. So I had gotten this little bit of training and I was like, all right, I'm going to go and I'm going to work and I'm going to earn some money and I'm going to get some roles and in my department, my experience, did not take into account as much as what are the next career steps. For example, like we do here at Western. It's one of the things that I really like about Western is that, we're focused on the art, but we're also like, okay, what are you going to do after you get out of here? Where do you want to go? How do we help you form a plan so that so that you're not just getting out like, oh, I guess I apply for jobs now, but our students get out there like, okay, here's some goals I can set. Here's some steps I'm going to do,
Excellent.
And that's super helpful because, for me, I had just had a little bit of training. And then, even after having that sort of, come to Jesus moment, I was taking a class here or taking a class there. And like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. And, I'd get, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, however much training a studio was offering in a class. And maybe I would get to apply it. Maybe I wouldn't after that. And in all of that training, there wasn't the level of self-reflection and self-evaluation that we had with you at LSU and, with some of the other faculty at LSU as well, like the journaling, the looking back over your own progress, the understanding that, in the industry, you're not going to get feedback. Whether your audition lands the role or not, you're not going to get feedback. And,
right.
A lot of directors in production, they're working towards the production going up. They're not teaching at the same time that they're directing. They're really hoping that they're going to get actors who are going to bring instinct, bring ideas, bring impulses so that they can just guide them to shape the story. Yeah. Most directors that I've worked with anyway, especially on theater schedules, which are so short, they don't want to draw your best out of you. They want you to put your best out there so that they can harness it and direct it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the journals. I started to require journals because I couldn't in my professional studio in California, I couldn't hold anyone's hand to the flame and say you need to rehearse. But if I required that they turn in a journal, then they were more likely to, because it was that form of accountability. And then I just continue to do that, at LSU, because I thought, hey, this really, really works. This is a way to ensure, but it's a way for me to ensure that rehearsing is happening. But the other benefit, of course, is the reflecting on your process, being intentional about I just think this is so important. What is setting goals for rehearsals so that rehearsals aren't just like, hey, I'm going to just do the scene. Seven Pillars is all about be specific. Be specific about what tool you're trying to implement here. Isolate them and then string them together, right? So that you have more ownership of what your process is and how it breaks down. So I'm glad that that's your experience, and that's what I hope is that by journaling, we're teaching our students, be intentional. What is the goal? How did you live up to that goal? Because all you have is process. Like you said, you don't get feedback. You can't hold on to the product. The only thing you can hold on to is process, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you continue. And, you know, the next question that comes to my mind is, how have you taken that training and especially when it comes to the 7 pillars act, because also Alan's a certified teacher. I didn't mention that. Most people don't know, a part of the MFA is being able to earn a cert. You still have to do the certification, right? And so it's not guaranteed. But Alan, you were always a fantastic teacher and a very thoughtful one, and very good with your students. So it was really wonderful for you to join the certification community. And so I'm curious, from the training you received, how do you find yourself implementing it? Like in the classroom, when you're acting? I know you just directed this year. You know, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I even when I'm teaching a course that maybe isn't specifically 7 pillars, like our introduction to acting course, our acting one is much less rigorous than, say, a 7 pillars focus.
Sure.
But I use the 7 pillars framework to structure classes like that. So we're still doing contact. Yes, we might be doing a lot more sort of high level improv, or a lot more of sort of theater ensemble building oriented
Yes.
kind of things, rather than individual process, because that's where the students are. Like, some of them have no acting experience when they come in, but I'll still kind of use the idea of, we're going to focus on being connected to each other and being with the person. And, you know, I introduced my students to one of the ways of looking at acting in the 7 pillars is the wedding cake, which I call the wedding cake hierarchy of what's important in acting. What are the most important things in acting, right? The foundation of that wedding cake is the other person on stage with you. Right?
Yeah.
The biggest tier of the cake is your partner in the scene, or partners in the scene. You know, even if that partner is the imaginary person you're talking to in a monologue, everything you want is in that other person. That's where your focus should be first. Like, the wedding cake is all about, where do you put your focus when you're in a scene, right? Then the next tier are your character's imaginary circumstances. You know, both their real and imaginary circumstances are the next tier. Then the next tier on top of that is their emotional life.
Yeah.
And then the little spouses on top, that's the text.
Yes.
You know, so that's like, where do you put your focus, you know, for the actors in their scene? And then I use sort of the 7 pillars framework for that, right? So even though we are only using, you know, in the introduction to acting class, we're only using a few of the exercises from the book, like trading fours and some of the physical life stuff to be connected. And then a lot of it are other exercises. We're still doing it in the concept of being in contact with the other people who are in the scene with you always, putting them above the words. Because the words aren't going to change, right? Everything you need is in the other people. And then looking at imaginary circumstances, and what do imaginary circumstances mean, and really pushing to think about, to view those imaginary circumstances in 3 dimensions, right? To see them, the entire world, not just the names of things, but actually envision it. We do a lot of daydreaming of circumstances and playing, you know, and a lot of those, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Think about everything for your character, right? Don't imagine that you're in a proscenium stage. Imagine that you're in Troy in the year, you know, 12 BCE or whatever, you know, facing the Roman army.
Yes, I love that. I think that's great. And, you know, it never stops, that work, you know, that if we can, that's one of the things I say to people is that it could be a beginning acting class, it could be a graduate acting class. Circumstances is still very challenging. And I like to say it's foundational. It's not a beginning thing because there's no end. You continue to work on it. I'm right now certifying a new group of teachers, and it's online. We have teachers from New York, California, Utah, and we're having a wonderful time. But we're right now on circumstance, and it takes time. I mean, these teachers, they're experienced actors, they're experienced teachers, and it's a head turner circumstance. It really is. But I find that if you can really experience something that's happening to you, all of the other pillars fall into place in the right way, So I love that cake metaphor.
It's, there are two things that I think are large contributors to why circumstance is so challenging. One is that type of immersive imagination is something that we get trained out of as we age.
Yeah.
It's something that most of us do as children in our imaginary worlds when we play, and then we get trained out of that to focus on the real world, to be serious, to be more mature.
Absolutely.
Another one is the way that a lot of acting training happens in high schools that don't have a lot of arts funding. Because we have students with all different levels of experience.
Yeah.
In all different sort of environments that they come from. And a lot of times, if your school play is just an extracurricular activity that you get to do for fun, your acting training is, don't forget your lines, don't bump into your furniture. What is your character feeling right now?
Yeah, right.
A lot of times when I talk to undergraduates about circumstance, they go right to emotion.
I know.
They go right to my character is feeling this, or they're talking about a different character's circumstance and not their character's own. So it's a lot of work to get them to, to see through their character's eyes and say, and focus on what does your character know? And sometimes they'll say, oh, my character knows that so-and-so does it. How does your character know that? Did they tell your character that? Did your character see that happen? Then how does your character know that?
Exactly right. It is. It's a hyper-focused point of view that changes moment by moment by moment. And yet, if you can see that, right, and you can lean into it, so much just can happen for you, I'm glad that I'm so happy to hear that that's a main part of what you're passing on. Because I think that's a change in training. I didn't get that through my training. I think that is a change that is what I'm hoping that we as acting teachers can pass on. It's one of the biggest ones. I think that's so valuable. Well, I wanted to also get a chance to hit on some other subjects before we run out of time. Because Alan, your insights are so great. While you were here, you were on the what was that committee that you were on for our DEI work? What was it called?
The Alliance for the Future.
Yes, and so Alan, you were always helping the university and the faculty take steps in that direction. And you were valuable to me in the classroom. I know you helped me update my type and brand document on better terms. It's just like you practically helped us. And then I also know that you trained with Black acting methods, and you really were very passionate about that. And I just want to hear, where's your head with that now? How do you see your own university addressing this? And what do you think is the next steps for us, maybe not just in education, but also in the industry when it comes to anti-racism and equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Wow, that's a big topic to unpack, right?
I know, it sure is.
As someone who's who's always sort of moved through spaces feeling marginalized. This is just a continuum in the work that I've been doing, but also recognizing that that I need to learn and evolve. I learned so much from the younger generations about, okay, here's where the goalpost is for the work that I did 20 years ago. That's not the goal anymore. We're past that. There's a new goal now. So,
Yes.
I need to adapt. And I mean, I think that's something that I think everyone can do if they're committed to being, to fighting the evil empire, whatever that means to you, is, being willing to be an expert in learning, and never assume that, well, I've got this all down, I know everything now.
Yes.
And to accept that one might not be right.
That takes humility, don't you think? That really, I think that's the biggest thing too. You're right to put an emphasis on, we can't just read some books and go, oh, I'm an anti-racist now. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a constant, it's a continuum, like you said. I think that's one of the most important things. Go on, please. You're in the middle of a thought.
I don't know. The other thing, like the big thing that I feel like, being in the position in universities in particular, our students carry the values that they learn in university into their career. Yeah. And they adhere to them really well. So I feel like that, for me, one of the things is trying to walk my walk. So, if I'm dedicated to ED&I try to practice that in my classroom, in my rehearsals, and call attention to those practices and why I do them. And, empowering my students and telling my students, you're going to go out and you're going to lead in this industry. You don't have to take it, because I mean, in my generation, I entered a generation with a bunch of actors who were all told, you got to pay your dues. You got to take it. You got to take the sexism. You got to take the racism. You got to accept the harm until you make it big. And, that's not true. That was the story that we were fed, but, so many people are finding success in so many ways. No one has to take it. And what's more, if they understand and they start treating each other with equity and respect now and carry that into the field, they will change the culture of the industry to match the values that they form now, right? It's not going to change overnight. It's not going to change tomorrow, but it will change with that generation. If we model that this is how it can be, if you want to make it that way, then, they'll make it that way.
And I think some people go, well, if you do that too much, will people be shocked when they get into the industry and it's way harsher than how, we treat them in the classroom? Pardon, the landline is ringing. Who's calling me? It's got to be my husband.
And that's the other half of it is, in the university training and in my acting classes, I also talk about the realities of the industry. Yeah. So I talk about the harms that the industry does. And contextualize it and say, these are things that you might face. Like, these are things that we're doing here so that hopefully when you get out, you can stop them from happening. You don't have to just accept them. You may make compromises at some point, but you don't have to just accept them. And you will ultimately become the people with the power in the industry. You can choose to stop the hazing. You can choose to stop the exploitation. You don't have to get to the point where you're the director, the producer, the casting authority, and you say, well, because this happened to me, I'm going to do it to someone else.
I think that's so good. And I feel so much for our students. And I hope that they can grow into this industry just being authentically themselves. Because I feel that because of this harmful industry, I took the abuse and I put that abuse on myself, you know? And if you're not careful, you then project that into the classroom, you know?
Yeah.
And as a woman, self-identity and self-love is very important, I notice, for all actors, but particularly for a lot of women who feel a lot of like social pressure to be a certain size or da-da-da-da-da. And it's, that I think is a big part of my mission as an educator. Just coming from my lens of being a woman, I feel, how can I help reflect health? Because the industry made me unhealthy, you know, and I try to write about that and talk to my students about it because it's a real problem. But I think that if I can pass that on, I'm not making them completely in denial about the industry. I'm hopefully saying, love yourself, be authentically yourself. And like you said, that has a gravitational pull. And we are seeing people breaking down the industry's norms, you know, about what it means, what it looks like to be an actor, you know? Far better now than it was 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. You know, even in advertising, which, you know, tends to go to the lowest common denominator, but you see so many more people now of different identities, different body types.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I notice, like I've noticed so many more non-binary people in advertisement. You know, I think there's a Zillow ad for an apartment that just the person they're talking about, they use their they them pronouns, and I was like, wait a minute, did they just do that? Like, and I went looking for the commercial again. I was like, yes, they did, and it wasn't even Pride Month when I saw it out there. It was just running, and I was like, right on.
Yeah, that's fabulous. You know, and I think the issue of gender and gender identity is still something that a lot of acting teachers are working on. How do they serve their students of different gender identities, or if they're non-binary, you know? And I think, you know, that is something that I'm actively trying to learn, and having you in the classroom was helpful too, you know, just to go, how can I best serve these students, you know? And because that's inclusive in our EDI work. Is gender identity, you know? Do you have any thoughts on that too? Like, how do you help students who are maybe even transitioning? How do you work with students in casting them appropriately to roles that they want to play? Because one of the issues in the industry is that it's a very binary industry. I just saw on a breakdown, and this was so cool. I saw on a theater breakdown, it said, these roles are written in a binary, right? But we are open to your identity. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool, because it freed up the roles. It freed up how they may be cast to different people. So I don't know. Do you have any reflections on that?
I've seen similar things. Like there was a big, when the Karate Kid, the musical, had its auditions, there were a number of roles that were open for non-binary characters, mostly in the ensemble. You know, they hadn't really opened up like Daniel LaRusso or you know, but where they had put them that they presented as was yes. You know, that Danny LaRusso presented as male and you know the female lead presented as female. There are a couple of different ways of, you know, serving different gender identities. You know, one approach is if you're working on binary materials, you know, having questions on your audition forms about the actors, you know, gender identities, and about their preference in genders that they'd like to play. You know, Are they comfortable playing characters who have a different gender identity than themselves? Do they have a preference for playing particular gender identities? Another one is to look for sources, because there are scripts that have non-binary characters in them. Looking to things like New Play Exchange, there are a lot of writers who have been creating works that have those characters for a while. Those scripts are just not as well known as, David Mamet or Lynn Nottage or something like that.
Yes.
So, part of that work is looking for scripts that have those characters written in them. Because, you don't really, you can do any production and put people in it, but you're not really representing those identities unless you're doing a production that includes those identities, right? Where the characters as written exist in that world with those identities. It's not necessarily, you're not fully achieving representation to do, for example, I don't know, the importance of being earnest with, all non-binary actors, right? Because yes, that's great that you're, making the effort to put people of that identity on stage, but you're really achieving representation when you're doing a play that has non-binary characters in it, played by non-binary actors.
And I think we need to bring those stories, like you said, you saw a commercial with a non-binary character. It's like, we need to bring those stories into the mainstream more. But as we've been talking about, a lot of that starts in the classroom. So I'm going to hit you up for that New Play Exchange, because this is exactly the material I'm looking for right now. And it's like we were saying, if we can give our students this material in their education, then they're going to expect it, and they're going to create more of it, and they're going to want to work in it, Yeah. And I think that's so inspiring, and I think that's so exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. It really is. Like to I feel like almost every day there's something where I'm like, God, I wish I knew about this years ago. Gee, I wish I knew about that years ago.
But it's good to experience the change. I'm happy about that too. The growing pains are tough, and going, I could have really benefited from that. Those feelings don't feel great, but at the same time, to witness change in our lives, that's all. I mean, I feel like that's all we can hope for, right? Is progress. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
Well, Alan, this has been so nice. I'm so happy. It's just to be present with you and to feel you're so inspired and you're so driven and passionate. I'm just so happy for you. Are you happy in Kentucky? Is life treating you well there?
Yeah, life has been pretty good so far in Kentucky. It's one of those things, just before we go, this is too short, Sonya. We need more time.
I know. I'm told it needs to be like, we can do what we want.
Right? Well, maybe we need to do like an inside the actor studio format and have a group of people in there, right? I know I'm dating myself by referencing that, but I'm like, let's bring some people. One of the great things, was moving to Louisiana for LSU was a completely different culture from anything I experienced. So it's a whole change. Yeah. And then Kentucky was really the same thing, like completely different. Just an example of having to kind of check my own assumptions was, at one point in the voice classes with Rocky at LSU, we talked about working on the so-called general American dialect. And I was like, no, that's just oppressive and nobody needs that. Let's not do this. Just right. And I mean, part of my assumption was, I was like, no white person ever needs that. Why are we doing that? That's just dumb, right? Then I came to Kentucky and I met some of my students in Kentucky who had stories of being discriminated against because of their Kentucky accent. Yeah. White students who, and there's this There's this term which I think is kind of a slur in Kentucky when they say someone sounds country.
Oh.
And it's usually someone who has a very pronounced Kentucky accent. And I think they mean they sound dumb. And I was like, and one of my students, brilliant actress, talked about going to LA and telling people she was from Kentucky. And they were, their response was, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Oh.
And I was like, oh. I was like, all right, so in our voice and diction class, we are going to do the so-called general American. I was like, these students actually need to know how to be able to use this skill to open doors for themselves, right? I mean, the difference is, I'm not teaching them this is the standard English you have to have for theater, but, I teach them, I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, this is the English of rich white men from Connecticut. That's the so-called general American. I'm going to teach you how, when you want to use it, you can use it so you can beat the system.
I love that. I think that's great. And I think that's the right, I learned the Edith Skinner technique initially, and it's very biased, and it's definitely not an appropriate voice approach now, but it's good that you're giving them a tool so that when that's appropriate and called for in the role, they have access to it just as much as I want to have diversity in my accents too, so I can be a better fit to the roles. It's just another dialect that you take on.
Exactly.
You don't change who you are, you're just able to adapt better.
Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. So so what are the courses you're teaching?
So thus far I've been teaching 3 levels of acting, right? Acting 1, acting 2, acting 3. Yeah. Well, acting 2 and, acting 3 was the first class I taught. So it was really a lot of 7 pillars, because I was like, oh, you're only the exam students. Maybe a little too much for them because they hadn't had any beforehand. But, acting 2 now is where I do a lot of the first 4 pillars, a lot of the circumstance, things like that. I've also been teaching the stage combat classes.
Oh, cool.
Voice and movement, voice and diction. I think that's everything. I might have taught another one that I've forgotten.
It's been a long year.
I'm teaching acting for the camera in not this fall, but next spring.
Oh, that's great.
So,
that's great. I'm teaching acting for the camera 2, level 2, this fall. So I basically have to create a curriculum for that. So that's a part of my summer homework.
Well, if you're interested, there is an organization in New York called, I'll forward you the email. I think it's called Freeze Frame. Mm-hmm. And they're supposed to be doing both an acting for the camera and a teaching acting for the camera workshop.
Oh, neat.
I think in the fall. I'll forward you the email that I got, which might give you some ideas to work. They might have a different approach and some things to.
I would love that. This is the thing I love is that, my favorite part of my job is getting to teach the grad students because, we become colleagues, right? And forever, Alan, we're colleagues and friends, and we can help each other for the rest of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. And I just think that that's so special and so valuable because
thank you.
It's thank God willing, it's a long life and a long career, and there's a lot more to learn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Leah was saying to me, for those of you who are tuning in, Leah's my partner. She's awesome. Leah said to me the other day, she said, I noticed you're referring to the LSU faculty as your friend now as opposed to your teacher.
Isn't that nice?
I was like, oh, my friend so-and-so. She's like, yeah. It's like, I noticed you're saying my friend now and not my professor. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I feel like I've made that shift finally.
Yes. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
This has been so fun. I wish you all the best this summer. And thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me and to share this with our students and colleagues and audience. We have lots of lovely people here.
Thank you for inviting me. This was an absolute pleasure.
Yes.
Like I said, I only wish it could be longer.
Me too. Well, okay, let's work on that. I'll work on that actors, what's it called? Live at the Actors Studio model.
Sounds good. I like
You'll
it.
be there. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I had to figure out how to end it now. That's my issue. Technology's not my friend. Okay, I think I found it.